Good Erev Shabbos and good Erev Yontif. Sukkot, October time, 1973. A few days after the outbreak of the Yom Kippur War, then Prime Minister Golda Meir decided to visit Israel soldiers stationed in the southern Golan Heights. This was just after a bitter battle in which Israeli tanks had finally succeeded in stopping a very fierce Syrian attack. So Golda Meir flew to the Golan Heights, where she got an update in real time as to what was going on. And at the same moment, she also noticed there were a unit of religious soldiers standing over there in a mobile sukkah, davening shachris, with their talesim on, their lulavim in their hands. And she wanted to go over and talk to them, but when she came closer, she saw they were in the middle of davening, so she waited until they finished. And when they finished their prayers, she addressed them and she said, Chag Sameach, and they were very startled to find nobody, somebody like that, the Prime Minister herself, addressing them. This was a reserve unit, and they hadn't seen their families since before Yom Kippur. They'd come straight from Yom Kippur in Shul. They'd been called up, and they'd gone straight in. So she started first asking them how they were doing and wanting to know what they did in their civilian lives. And then she asked them, by the way, do you have any other questions? Do you have any questions you want to ask me? And one of the people there actually said, yes, please. He said, my father was killed in the War of Independence, but we won. And my uncle was killed in the 1956 war, but we won. My brother was killed in the Six-Day War, but we won. And last week I lost a good friend here in this battle, and I'm sure that in the end we're going to win. But are all these sacrifices worth it? What's the worth of all of this if we can't live in peace? And so Golda Meir was silent for several moments. And she then addressed the soldier and she said, you should know, I cry and I mourn for all those losses. In my bed at night, I think about all of them and their families. And I have to tell you that if this war was just about us and for us, it's likely that you're right. But if our sacrifices are for the entire Jewish nation, then I believe with all my heart that it's worth any price. And she went on recalling how in 1948 she had been Israel's first diplomatic representative to the Soviet Union. That was a time when Stalin was ruling with a very iron fist. Religious activities were strictly banned. Anybody that was caught serving as a moyel or a sheikhet or teaching Judaism would be sent to Siberia at best, if not shot. Jews would put on their tefillin underneath their blankets so that their kids shouldn't see them and report them, because that's how brainwashed they'd become. And obviously, the Russian Jews were absolutely forbidden to make any kind of connection to the staff of the Israeli embassy. So Golda Meir got to Moscow in the month of Tishrei, and during the holidays, the diplomatic staff went to pray at the Great Synagogue in Moscow. The first time they got there was only a small crowd present because nobody knew that they were coming. But the next time they came, it was Simchas Torah, and this time there were tens of thousands. The place was filled. Mothers with babes in their arms, old and young. Even Jewish soldiers wearing their army uniforms, despite all the dangers and threats. Jews came to express their solidarity, to express their support and their love for the land of Israel. So Golda Meir entered the synagogue. People just wanted to touch her, to get a piece of the reality of Israel. Shalom Aleichem, she said, good Yantiv, they addressed to her. And she replied to all of them. She replied in Yiddish. She said, Dankech for bleiben Yidden, which means basically, thank you for staying Jewish. Now, some 25 years later, talking to the soldiers, the Golan Heights, she concluded that at that moment, she understood that what happens in the land of Israel influences the entire nation of Israel, all the Jewish people. What does it have to do with us here today, Sukkot in South Africa? It's called Sukkot because of the Sukkah. And the Torah tells us that we have to for a 7-day period, we should live in these booths, these tabernacles. Every resident among the Israelites should live in these booths, in these sukkot, in order that your ensuing generation should know that I had the children of Israel live in booths when I took them out of the land of Egypt. It's actually part of the mitzvah of being in the sukkah is to remember the why we're in the sukkah, which is to remember that Hashem took us out of Egypt and He looked after us when He did so. There's a bit of an argument between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva as to what were these booths. Were they really constructed booths, or were they the clouds of glory? Rabbi Eliezer says that we're talking about the clouds of glory that surrounded and embraced the Jewish people, that God gave them as a miraculous way to protect them from the sun, to wash their clothes, to make their clothes grow with them, to clear the path for them as they went along, to kill all or drive away at least the snakes and the scorpions, so that they should be unmolested as they were going through the desert for those 40 years. According to Rabbi Akiva, he understands these booths are just that. They're dwelling places, and they're like huts, like the sukkah is. According to Rabbi Eliezer, it's the supernatural, miraculous giant walls made by the cloud that surrounded the Jewish nation while it wandered in the desert and kept things cool and whatnot. And that's what we're supposed to remember. He's saying that we should remember the miraculous intervention of Hashem protecting us with the clouds, and so we sit in the sukkah. But according to Rabbi Akiva, who understands that the Jews actually had homes, huts like they built for themselves, what are we remembering on Sukkot? What's the miracle? I mean, every other Jewish holiday, Pesach came out of Egypt, miracle of the Exodus, Shavuos, the giving of the Torah. Sukkot, according to Rabbi Akiva, wasn't anything miraculous. It was just Jews living in homes and huts that they built for themselves. So what's going on? Rabbi Akiva was a fervent lover of the Jewish people. And whenever he had the opportunity to defend, to find merit, he would do so. And perhaps we can say that why Rabbi Akiva was the one to remember the Sukkot that the Jews built in the desert, because in saying so, he wanted to stress that the holiday of Sukkot is there to remind us not about the greatness of God. We don't need reminding about that. To remind us of the greatness of the Jewish nation, which traveled in the desert for 40 years, living in simple huts, but still never gave up or lost hope that they would ultimately reach their promised land. As the prophet Jeremiah says, I remember to you the loving kindness of your youth, you're following me in the desert. In other words, Rabbi Akiva's innovation is that the entire theme or mission of Sukkot is to emphasize the greatness and the merit of the Jewish people, to remind God, so to speak, of the sacrifice of the Jewish nation upon leaving Egypt, and find merit, therefore, for the entire Jewish nation. And the lesson then, I guess, my friends, is it sometimes happens that a person says to himself or herself that I don't see what's so important about doing this particular mitzvah. What if I don't do it today? Maybe I don't feel like building a sukkah this year. When the kids were here, I built a sukkah, so they should have that. They're growing up. You know what? It's just me and the wife. What for? I'll use the one at shul, if there is one. So to that, the answer is that every time that we do a mitzvah, every individual mitzvah that you do, whether it's Sukkot, whether it's Shabbos, whether it's Kashrus, whether it's learning some Torah, whether it's saying your prayers, putting on tefillin, besides that, the influence that mitzvah has on you as the individual practitioner, there's also an influence for the entire Jewish people. So you know what? If a person who builds a sukkah every year suddenly doesn't put up that sukkah that year, then the Jewish neighbor is going to think to himself, well, the religious guy who usually puts up a sukkah every year doesn't put up a sukkah this year, so if he can compromise on that, I can also allow myself not to celebrate sukkahs. In fact, forget it. So we have to remember that we live in community. Baruch Hashem, we live in community. And every good deed or every act that we do has some effect on each other. Okay, so please God, we should be able to rejoice and look forward to when we can socially not distance ourselves, but in the meantime, at least spiritually, we can be close. We can be as close as the schach leaves are to each other, and we can embrace each other with the hug and the embrace of the walls of the sukkah. And as a community of fellow Jews, we can be there with each other, for each other, doing the mitzvahs that we can, giving merit to each other, and hopefully spreading joy amongst each other. Wish you a Shabbat Shalom and a Chag fantastic.